sold beneath the summer sun. The summer sun beat down on the dusty station platform like a hammer on an anvil, and 18-year-old Elena Hart stood in chains she couldn't see, the kind forged by a father's debt and a handshake over whiskey. The man who'd bought her stood 20 feet away, silent as stone, while her father pocketed his payment and rode off without looking back. Heat shimmered off the parched earth, distorting everything, making the whole transaction feel like a fever dream. But the sweat running down her spine was real. The stranger's shadow falling across her face was real, and the fact that she'd just been sold like livestock, that was real too. Before we begin Elena's journey from the auction block to something she never imagined possible, please hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Now, let's step into the unforgiving heat of the frontier, where summer offers no mercy, only exposure. The cicadas screamed from the grasslands beyond the station, their relentless chorus the only sound besides Elena's own breathing. She stood perfectly still, her worn cotton dress clinging to her back, her hair already escaping the hasty braid she'd woven that morning in what used to be her bedroom. That felt like a lifetime ago now, though the sun hadn't yet reached its peak. The man who'd purchased her, she couldn't bring herself to think of it any other way, finally moved. He was tall, built like someone who'd spent decades wrestling the earth into submission, with shoulders broad enough to carry burdens Elena couldn't imagine. His face was weathered, lined deep around the eyes and mouth, and his hair showed threads of silver among the dark brown. He couldn't have been more than 40, but the frontier had a way of adding years to a man's appearance. "Name's Silas Rowe," he said, his voice like gravel shifting. He didn't offer his hand. "You'll be coming to my ranch. 3 children need tending, house needs keeping, works hard but you'll be fed and sheltered." Elena's throat felt like the dusty road stretching behind them. "And if I refuse?" Something flickered in Silas's eyes. Not anger, but perhaps a grim acknowledgement. "Then I'll put you back on the next stage with money for passage anywhere you choose. But you should know, your father's debt follows you. Men who hold that paper aren't known for patience or mercy." The words settled over her like the oppressive heat. Her father had made it clear enough before they'd arrived at the station. She could go with Silas Rowe, or she could take her chances with Cyrus Brennan's collection men. Brennan owned half the territory, or so people said, and what he didn't own he intended to acquire, by purchase, pressure, or force. "The children," Elena said quietly, surprised her voice worked at all. "How old?" 10, 7, and 4. Silas's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted slightly. "Their mother died 2 winters past. Fever took her quick." 2 years. 2 years these children had been without a mother, and now their father had bought them a replacement the way someone might purchase a plow horse. The thought made Elena's stomach turn, but what choice did she have? Her father had sold her to settle his gambling debts. At least at the Rowe Ranch, she'd have a roof and a purpose, even if she'd arrived there in chains of circumstance. "I'll come," she said. Silas nodded once, then turned toward a wagon hitched to 2 sturdy horses. The wagon bed held supplies, flour sacks, tools, coiled rope, and a rifle resting carefully against the sidewall. He climbed up to the driver's seat with the easy motion of long practice and waited. Elena gathered her single bag, everything she owned fit inside one worn carpet bag, and climbed up beside him. The wooden seat was rough beneath her, already hot from the sun. Silas clicked his tongue, and the horses pulled forward, wagon wheels creaking as they left the station behind. The road stretched ahead through endless grassland, golden and brittle under the merciless summer sky. Heat rose in visible waves, making the horizon shimmer and dance. Elena had never traveled this far from town, and the sheer openness of the land made her feel exposed, vulnerable, like a single dark figure on a vast empty page. They rode in silence for what felt like hours. The sun climbed higher, turning the wagon seat into a griddle, and Elena's dress into a second skin of sweat-dampened cotton. She'd never experienced heat like this, the kind that pressed down from above and radiated up from below, trapping you between layers of scorching air with nowhere to escape. "Water," Silas said finally, passing her a canteen without looking at her. Elena took it gratefully, the metal warm against her palms. The water inside was tepid but wet, and she forced herself to take small sips rather than gulping it down. She passed it back, and Silas took his own measured drink before securing it again. "Ranch is another 2 hours," he said. "You can ask questions if you want." Elena considered that. There were so many questions she didn't know where to begin. "The children, what are their names?" "Grace is 10, Daniel's 7, little one's called Lily." "Do they know about me?" "They know someone's coming to help. Grace understands more than the others." He paused, eyes fixed on the road ahead. "They're good children. They've had to grow up harder than they should have. Grace mothers the little ones. Daniel tries to be the man of the house when I'm in the fields. It's not right, children carrying grown burdens." The rawness in his voice surprised her, the first real emotion she'd heard from him. Elena studied his profile, the set of his jaw, the way his hands held the reins with practiced ease. Whatever else Silas Rowe might be, he loved his children. That counted for something. "I don't know much about children," Elena admitted. "I was the youngest in my family, just me and my brother, and he left for the railroad camps 2 years ago." "You'll learn. Grace will help. She's been doing the work herself. You'll mostly be taking the burden off her shoulders, letting her be a child again." The wagon crested a small rise, and suddenly the landscape opened before them. In the distance, nestled in a shallow valley where a creek cut through the grassland, stood a cluster of buildings. The main house was larger than Elena expected. 2 stories of weathered wood with a wide porch wrapping around the front. A barn stood to the left, and she could see corrals, outbuildings, and what looked like a bunkhouse for ranch hands. "That's home," Silas said simply. As they descended into the valley, Elena noticed details. The garden plot behind the house, struggling in the summer heat but showing signs of determined care. Laundry hanging motionless on a line. Chickens scratching in the dust near the barn. And on the porch, 3 small figures watching their approach. The children. Elena's heart began to pound. This was real now. In minutes, she'd step down from this wagon and become responsible for 3 young lives that had already seen too much loss. What if they hated her? What if they saw her as an intruder, someone trying to replace their mother? The wagon rolled to a stop in front of the house, and Silas set the brake. The children remained on the porch, still as fence posts. The oldest, Grace, held the youngest's hand. She was thin, with dark hair pulled back severely, and eyes that looked far too old for her face. The boy, Daniel, stood slightly apart, arms crossed over his narrow chest in unconscious mimicry of adult defensiveness. And little Lily, no more than 4, stared with enormous eyes, her thumb finding its way to her mouth. "Children," Silas said as he climbed down. "This is Elena Hart. She's come to help with the house and look after you." No one moved. The silence stretched taut as fence wire. Elena climbed down carefully, her legs stiff from the long ride. She set her bag down and looked at the 3 faces watching her with varying degrees of suspicion and uncertainty. "Hello," she said, keeping her voice gentle. "I know this is strange for all of us. I won't pretend to be something I'm not, but I promise I'll do my best to help however I can." Grace's eyes narrowed slightly, assessing. "Can you cook?" "Yes." "Can you sew?" "Yes." "Can you read?" "Yes." The rapid-fire questions felt like a test, and Elena met each one honestly. Grace seemed to consider this, then glanced at her father. "She'll do," the girl said finally, a pronouncement delivered with the gravity of a judge. Then she released Lily's hand and stepped forward. "I'll show you the house. Pa, Daniel can help you unload." It was a dismissal, clear as day, and Silas accepted it with a slight nod. Elena found herself following Grace through the front door into the relative cool of the house's interior. The main room served as kitchen and living space combined. A large table dominated the center, surrounded by mismatched chairs. The stove stood against one wall, and shelves held dishes, jars of preserves, and cooking implements. Everything was scrupulously clean but worn, the marks of hard use and harder times. "Bedroom's upstairs," Grace said, all business. "You'll have the small room at the end. Used to be Ma's sewing room. Lily and I share one room. Daniel has the other, and Pa's is at the front. Outhouse is behind the barn. Well water's good, but you have to prime the pump in the mornings. Chickens need feeding at dawn and dusk. Garden needs watering every day this time of year or everything dies. Elena listened, trying to absorb the flood of information. Grace moved through the house like a general inspecting troops, pointing out details with brisk efficiency. 7 years old, Silas had said, but Grace carried herself like someone much older, someone who'd been forced to become the woman of the house before she'd finished being a child. "Grace," Elena said softly, stopping in the middle of the main room. "Can I ask you something?" The girl turned, instantly wary. "What?" "What do you need most? Not what the house needs, not what your father or brother or sister needs. What do you need?" The question seemed to catch Grace completely off guard. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. For just a moment, the adult mask slipped and Elena saw the exhausted child beneath. "I need," Grace's voice cracked, "I need to not be so tired all the time." The admission hung between them, raw and honest. Elena's heart cracked right open. "Then that's what we'll work on," she said. "You show me how you like things done, and then you let me do them. You can check my work, you can tell me if I'm doing it wrong, but you're going to rest. That's the deal." Grace stared at her, tears welling up despite obvious effort to hold them back. "You mean it?" "I mean it." The girl's shoulders sagged, as if an invisible weight had suddenly lifted. She wiped her eyes roughly with the back of her hand. Okay, I'll show you everything." Over the next hour, Grace took Elena through the daily routine of the household, where things were kept, how the stove worked, what each child would and wouldn't eat. She showed Elena the root cellar, the smokehouse, the garden struggling in the brutal heat. Daniel followed at a distance, still suspicious but curious, while Lily eventually took Elena's hand with the trusting openness only very young children possessed. By the time Silas appeared in the doorway, Elena had a mental map of the household and a growing understanding of just how much these children had been carrying. Grace had essentially been running the household alone, with Daniel helping where he could and Lily doing her best not to be a burden despite being barely 4 years old. "Grace," Silas said, "show Elena her room, then you children get washed up for supper." "I'll make supper," Elena said quickly. "Grace can show me where everything is, and then she can rest." Silas's eyebrows rose slightly, the most expression she'd seen from him yet. Grace has been doing the work of a grown woman," Elena interrupted gently. "And she's done it well. But she's also 10 years old and exhausted. If I'm here to help, then let me help." Father and daughter exchanged a long look. Finally, Silas nodded. "All right. Grace, show her the pantry stores and then you're relieved of duty for the evening." Relief flooded Grace's face so obviously that Elena felt her throat tighten. The girl led her to the pantry, a small room off the kitchen stocked with supplies, and quickly inventoried what they had: dried beans, cornmeal, bacon, a few precious jars of last year's preserves. Not abundant, but enough to work with. "There's a chicken that stopped laying," Grace said. "Pa was going to butcher it tomorrow, but we could do it tonight if you know how." Elena had helped her mother prepare chickens countless times. "I know how. You go rest. I'll call you when supper's ready." Grace hesitated, clearly torn between duty and desperate need. Duty had won for so long, but finally, exhaustion triumphed. She nodded and climbed the stairs slowly, each step a visible effort. Elena stood alone in the kitchen, in a house that wasn't hers, preparing to cook for a family that had bought her like property. The surreal nature of her situation threatened to overwhelm her, but she pushed it down. She'd agreed to this. She'd chosen this over whatever horrors her father's creditors might have visited upon her. Now she'd make the best of it. She found the chicken in question, a scrawny hen past her prime, and made quick, efficient work of the butchering. The stove was already banked with coals from earlier in the day, and she fed it carefully, bringing it back to cooking temperature. She put beans on to boil and started on biscuits, mixing cornmeal and flour with practiced hands. The physical work felt good, familiar. Her mother had taught her to cook, and even after everything else had fallen apart in her family, this remained, the simple alchemy of turning raw ingredients into sustenance. She was sliding the biscuits into the oven when she sensed someone watching. Daniel stood in the doorway, arms still crossed, face still skeptical. "Can I help you with something?" Elena asked. "Why'd you come here?" The directness of it caught her off guard. She considered lying, softening the truth, but Daniel's eyes were too sharp for that. He'd see through it. My father sold me to settle his debts, she said simply. Your father offered me a place here instead of leaving me to his creditors. So I came. You're not our ma. No, I'm not. So what are you? Elena turned to face him fully, wiping her hands on her apron. I don't know yet. Someone who's going to help, I hope. Someone who's going to take some of the burden off Grace's shoulders and make sure you and Lily are looked after. Beyond that, I guess we'll all figure it out together. Daniel studied her for a long moment. You really gonna stay? Or you gonna leave like... He stopped himself. Like who? Nothing. He turned to go. Daniel. Elena waited until he looked back. I promise you this. I won't leave without telling you first. Whatever happens, you won't wake up one day and find me gone. You have my word. The boy's jaw worked. He nodded once, sharp and quick, then disappeared. Elena let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. These children had been abandoned by death and circumstance too many times already. Of course they were suspicious. Of course they were guarded. She'd have to earn their trust one day, one meal, one kept promise at a time. The chicken and beans simmered while the biscuits baked, filling the kitchen with smells of home and comfort. Elena found plates, mismatched but clean, and set the table. 5 places. A family. Not her family, but perhaps in time, something close to it. Silas appeared when the sun began its descent, washing at the pump outside before coming in. The children followed, Grace looking more rested already, Daniel still watchful, Lily clutching a rag doll with one eye missing. They sat. Elena served, dishing out portions of chicken and beans, placing biscuits on each plate. The meal was simple, frontier fare, but it was hot and plentiful and made with care. Silas took the first bite, chewing thoughtfully. Good, he said simply. It was the highest praise she could have hoped for. The children ate hungrily, especially Grace, who looked like she hadn't allowed herself to eat her fill in a long time. Elena ate little, too aware of being watched, assessed, judged by these 4 people whose lives she'd suddenly become part of. After supper, Grace automatically started to rise to clear the table, but Elena touched her shoulder gently. I'll clean up. You take Lily upstairs and help her get ready for bed. But the dishes will still be here tomorrow if I don't finish them tonight. Go on. Grace looked to her father, who nodded. She took Lily's hand and led her upstairs, the little girl chattering about something Elena couldn't quite hear. Daniel helped carry plates to the wash basin without being asked, a peace offering, perhaps, or simply habit. Silas remained at the table, watching Elena work. You meant what you said, he observed, about letting Grace be a child. She's carrying too much. A 10-year-old shouldn't have those shadows under her eyes. No. Silas's voice held old grief. Her mother's death. It fell hardest on Grace. She tried to step into those shoes before the grave was even filled. Elena pumped water into the basin and began washing dishes, her hands moving through familiar motions. Did you love her? Your wife? The question was too forward, too personal, but it slipped out before she could stop it. She braced for anger or dismissal. Yes, Silas said quietly. Married young, built this place together. She was strong, practical, good with the children and the land both. Fever came fast. 3 days from first chill to... He stopped. 3 days. I'm sorry. Why? You didn't know her, didn't cause her death. Because you loved her, and she's gone, and that deserves sorrow even from strangers. Silas was quiet for a long moment. When Elena glanced over, something in his expression had softened, just slightly. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? Someone harder, more desperate. Someone who'd take the first chance to run or make trouble. Elena dried a plate carefully. I might still run. I might still be trouble. You don't know me yet. No, Silas agreed. But you kept your word to Grace, and you answered Daniel honestly, and you didn't flinch when I told you the work would be hard. That counts for something. They fell into silence again, but it felt different now, less brittle, more settled. Elena finished the dishes and wiped down the table while Silas checked the doors and windows, securing the house for the night. "You'll want to bolt your door," he said as they stood at the base of the stairs. "Not because of me, I give you my word on that, but the ranch hands bunk out back, and while they're good men, it's better to be cautious." Elena nodded, understanding the warning for what it was. Protection, not threat. "Thank you." Upstairs, she found her room exactly as Grace had described. Small, containing a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a single window overlooking the darkening valley. Someone, probably Grace, had left a pitcher of water and a basin on the dresser. A thin cotton nightgown lay folded on the bed. Elena closed the door and leaned against it, finally alone. The day crashed over her all at once. The sale, the journey, the children, the strangeness of everything. She was in a house full of people she didn't know, in a life she'd never imagined, bound by circumstance and her father's debts to a future she couldn't predict. She should cry. She should rage against the injustice of it all. But as she looked out the window at the vast summer sky turning deep purple, studded with emerging stars, what she felt instead was something close to relief. Here, at least, she had purpose. Here, she wasn't just her father's burden or her brother's abandoned sister. Here, she could be useful. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, she knew that. The work would be hard, the heat relentless, the children's trust fragile, but tonight she'd made supper for a family that needed her. She'd given an exhausted child permission to rest. She'd started to build something, even if she didn't yet know what it would become. Elena changed into the nightgown and lay down on the unfamiliar bed. Through the thin walls, she could hear Lily's sleepy voice asking Grace questions. Grace's patient answers, the creak of floorboards as Daniel settled into his own room. Below, Silas's heavy tread as he made a final check of the house. The sounds of a household. A family. Not hers. Not yet. Maybe never. But for tonight, it was enough to belong somewhere, even if she'd arrived there in chains of debt and desperation. She closed her eyes and let the exhaustion pull her down into sleep, where the summer heat couldn't reach and the weight of tomorrow couldn't touch her yet. Outside, the cicadas sang their endless song, and the frontier night settled over the valley like a held breath, waiting to see what morning would bring. Dawn came early to the Rowe Ranch, announced by roosters and the low lowing of cattle in distant pastures. Elena woke to unfamiliar sounds and unfamiliar light slanting through a window that wasn't hers, in a room that smelled of old wood and lavender sachets someone had tucked into the dresser drawers long ago. For a disoriented moment, she couldn't remember where she was or why her body ached from sleeping on a mattress that felt nothing like her own. Then it all came rushing back. The station. The sale. Silas Rowe and his 3 orphaned children. This new life she'd stumbled into like falling down a well. She dressed quickly in the same worn dress from yesterday. She'd need to wash clothes soon, add that to the mental list of tasks, and made her way downstairs. The house was still quiet, but she could hear movement from outside. Through the kitchen window, she saw Silas already at work near the barn, his silhouette dark against the pale pink sky. The man apparently didn't believe in sleeping past sunrise. Elena set about building up the fire in the stove, her hands remembering the rhythm even if her mind was still foggy with sleep. Coffee first. Everything else could wait until there was coffee. She found the grounds in a tin on the shelf and set the pot to boil, then started on biscuits and gravy, using the last of yesterday's bacon drippings and some flour. She was sliding the biscuits into the oven when Grace appeared at the bottom of the stairs, already dressed, her dark hair braided with military precision. "You're up early," the girl observed, but there was approval in her tone. "Habit. My mother always said the day starts before the sun, or the sun starts without you." Grace moved to the window, looking out toward where her father worked. "Pa's been up since 4. He always is during summer. Too much work, not enough daylight hours to do it." Elena poured 2 cups of coffee, passing one to Grace before the girl could protest. "Even children can drink coffee on a ranch," she said gently, "especially children who've been doing adult work." Grace took the cup with both hands, inhaling the steam. "Ma used to let me have some on cold mornings, mixed with lots of milk and sugar. Would you like it that way now?" A pause, then a small shake of her head. "No, I like it strong now. Got used to it." They stood together in the quiet kitchen, drinking coffee while the sky lightened outside and the biscuits baked. It felt almost peaceful, this small moment of stillness before the day's demands crashed down on them both. "What's the routine?" Elena asked. "What happens after breakfast?" Grace launched into explanation mode again, ticking off tasks on her fingers. "Chickens first. Then the garden needs watering before it gets too hot. There's laundry. I usually do it Mondays and Thursdays. Bread baking on Wednesdays, mending whenever there's time, plus cooking 3 meals, keeping the house clean, watching Lily, helping Daniel with his letters when Pa says he needs to practice." The sheer volume of it was staggering. "And you've been doing all of this alone?" "Pa helps when he can, and Daniel does the chicken coop now and carries water. But most of it, yeah, since Ma died. 2 years. This child had been running a frontier household for 2 years, carrying burdens that would exhaust a grown woman." Elena felt anger kindle in her chest. Not at Silas, who clearly loved his children and was doing his best, but at the cruel arithmetic of frontier life that demanded such sacrifices from the young. "Well, you're not alone anymore," Elena said firmly. "Today, you're going to teach me everything, and then tomorrow you're going to let me do it while you do something children are supposed to do. Play. Read, rest, something that doesn't involve work." Grace looked at her skeptically over the rim of her coffee cup. "Pa paid good money for you. He expects the household to run and the children to be cared for. That includes you, Grace. You're a child who needs caring for, even if you've forgotten that." The girl's eyes welled up suddenly, fierce and bright. She blinked hard, refusing to let the tears fall. "I can't forget. If I stop, everything falls apart. Then I'll hold it together while you remember how to be 10 years old again." Before Grace could respond, the front door opened and Silas stepped in, bringing the smell of hay and horses with him. His eyes went from his daughter to Elena and back again, reading something in the tableau that made his expression soften almost imperceptibly. "Coffee smells good," he said. Elena poured him a cup while Grace quickly turned away, wiping at her eyes. Silas accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks, then cleared his throat. "Elena, after breakfast, I need to show you the property lines. Make sure you know where the ranch ends and where you shouldn't wander. It's important." Something in his tone made the hairs on Elena's neck prickle. "Is there danger?" "There's always danger on the frontier, but I want you aware of the specific kind around here." He took a long drink of coffee. "We'll talk after we eat." Daniel appeared next, then Lily trailing behind him with her rag doll clutched tight. They ate breakfast together, biscuits and gravy, fried eggs from the hen house, and Elena watched the family dynamics unfold. Silas spoke little but listened carefully when his children talked. Grace monitored everyone's plates, making sure Lily ate enough and Daniel didn't gulp his food too fast. The boy himself remained watchful, especially of Elena, though she caught him sneaking glances that held more curiosity than suspicion now. After breakfast, Grace started to clear the table automatically, but Silas stopped her with a hand on her shoulder. "Daniel can help Elena with dishes this morning. I need you to watch Lily while I show Elena the property." Grace looked startled. Clearly being relieved of dish duty was unprecedented, but she nodded, taking Lily's hand and leading her toward the main room where a basket of mending waited. Daniel and Elena worked in silence at first, him carrying plates while she washed. Finally, he spoke. "Pa doesn't usually show people the property lines, especially not on the second day." Elena glanced at him. "Why not?" "Because it means trouble's coming, or already here." Daniel's young face was grim. "It means he needs you to know how to keep safe when he can't watch over you himself." The matter-of-fact way he said it chilled Elena more than if he'd sounded frightened. This boy, barely 7 years old, spoke of danger and safety, like seasoned concepts, familiar as the sunrise. "What kind of trouble?" she asked quietly. "The kind that wants our land, the kind that doesn't care who gets hurt taking it." Daniel finished drying a plate and set it carefully on the shelf. "Pa's kept it away so far, but it keeps circling closer, like coyotes around a wounded calf." Before Elena could press further, Silas appeared in the doorway. "Ready?" She dried her hands and followed him outside into the already building heat. The summer sun was merciless even at this early hour, turning the sky a hard, bright blue that hurt to look at directly. They walked past the barn and corrals, heading toward the eastern boundary of the property. "My land runs from the creek westward to those bluffs," Silas said, pointing. "North to the territorial road, south to the canyon rim. About 4,000 acres total. It's good grazing land, water access, timber in the high country. Worth something." "Worth enough that someone wants it," Elena said, remembering Daniel's words. Silas's jaw tightened. "Man named Cyrus Brennan owns the land east of here. Has for about 5 years. He's been buying up every property he can get his hands on, consolidating the whole valley under his control. Some he buys fair, some he pressures until people sell cheap, and some—" He stopped walking, turning to face her directly. "Your father's debt. The one that brought you here. Who do you think holds that paper?" The ground seemed to shift under Elena's feet. "Brennan. Brennan. He's been trying to get leverage on my land for 2 years, offered to buy me out a dozen times. I've refused every offer, so he's been looking for other ways to apply pressure. When your father came through town gambling and drinking, Brennan saw an opportunity, got him deep in debt, then offered him a way out, give up his daughter to Brennan's service, and the debt disappears." Elena's stomach turned. "My father agreed to that?" "He did. But I heard about it through a friend in town. Offered to pay your father's debt myself in exchange for you coming here instead. Paid more than Brennan would have, too. Your father took my offer because cash in hand spends easier than promises. So I'm, what, a pawn in a land dispute?" Silas's expression was hard. "You're a person who got caught in circumstances beyond your control. But yes, Brennan won't be happy I interfered with his plan. He might try to claim you were promised to him first. He might send men to pressure you into leaving. He might—" Silas stopped, choosing his words carefully. "He might try to take you by force and claim it was legal collection on a debt." The full horror of it crystallized. Elena had thought she understood her situation, sold by her father, bought by Silas, reduced to a transaction. But she hadn't grasped the deeper currents, the territorial warfare she'd been pulled into. "Why did you do it?" she asked. "Why not let Brennan have what he wanted and keep yourself out of it?" Silas was quiet for a long moment, looking out over his land. "Because I know what Brennan does to people under his control, especially women, and because my daughter begged me to help if I could. Grace heard about your situation in town. Apparently your father was drunk and talking about it openly. She asked me if there was any way to stop it." He met Elena's eyes. "My daughter has a good heart despite everything life's taught her about cruelty. I couldn't refuse her. So she was here because a 10-year-old girl had asked her father to intervene." The thought made Elena's throat tight. "What do I need to know to stay safe?" she asked. "Stay on the property. Don't go to town without me. If riders come and I'm not here, get the children into the root cellar and bolt the door from inside. There's a rifle in my bedroom. Grace knows where. She knows how to load it too, though I hope it never comes to that." Silas started walking again, and Elena followed. "My ranch hands are good men. You can trust them. But don't trust strangers. Don't accept offers of help from people you don't know, and don't believe anyone who says I've sent them to fetch you." They walked the property lines for another hour, Silas pointing out landmarks and boundaries, showing her the best paths through the rough country and the places where the land turned treacherous. By the time they headed back toward the house, the sun was high and brutal, and Elena's dress clung to her skin with sweat. Near the barn, they encountered one of the ranch hands, a weathered man in his 50s with kind eyes and a missing front tooth. "Elena, this is Tom Bridger," Silas said. "He's been with me since I first settled this land. Tom, Miss Elena Hart. She's here to help with the household and children." Tom touched the brim of his hat respectfully. "Ma'am, good to have help for the little ones. They've been needing it." "Tom's in charge when I'm away from the ranch," Silas continued. "You can trust his word as you'd trust mine." Elena nodded, filing away this information. Tom Bridger. Trustworthy. In charge during Silas's absence. Another hand emerged from the barn. Younger, maybe early 20s, with an easy smile and casual posture that struck Elena as practiced rather than natural. "And this is Jake Morrison," Silas said, his tone noticeably cooler. "He signed on 3 months back. Works hard enough." The faint praise spoke volumes. Jake's smile widened as he looked at Elena, his gaze traveling over her in a way that made her skin crawl. Pleasure, ma'am. Real pleasure. Ranch could use some feminine beauty around here. Miss Hart is here to care for my children, Silas said flatly. She's under my protection. That's all anyone needs to know. The temperature in the conversation dropped 20 degrees. Jake's smile faltered slightly, but he recovered. Of course, boss. Just being friendly. Be friendly by getting back to work. Those fence posts won't replace themselves. Jake tipped his hat and sauntered off, but Elena caught the flash of something ugly in his expression before he turned away. Tom noticed it too, his weathered face tightening. Watch that one, Tom said quietly once Jake was out of earshot. He's got ambitions bigger than his common sense, and he doesn't like being told what to do. Silas nodded grimly. I know, I've been considering letting him go, but help is hard to find this time of year. After harvest, though, he left the sentence unfinished. Back at the house, Elena found Grace teaching Lily letters, while Daniel practiced writing on a slate board. The domestic scene was peaceful, almost idyllic, except for the tension thrumming beneath it all, the awareness of danger circling the property like wolves around a campfire. The rest of the day unfolded in a rhythm of work. Elena learned the patterns of the household under Grace's careful instruction, where the spring water ran coldest for keeping butter fresh, how to bank the stove fire so it would last overnight, which chickens were the reliable layers and which were destined for the pot, how to work the butter churn, mend a split seam, coax the reluctant garden plants to produce in the brutal heat. Grace watched everything with critical eyes, ready to correct mistakes. But Elena saw the girl gradually relaxing as she realized the work was being done properly. By afternoon, Grace was actually sitting down while Elena hauled water, and by evening she was reading to Lily instead of frantically trying to accomplish 6 tasks at once. Supper that night was venison stew. Tom had brought meat from a deer he'd shot that morning, with fresh bread Elena had managed to bake without burning. The family gathered around the table again, and this time the meal felt less like a test and more like a routine settling into place. After supper, while Daniel and Grace cleared dishes, Lily approached Elena shyly. "Will you tell me a story?" the little girl asked, her rag doll dangling from one hand. Elena glanced at Silas, who nodded slightly. She dried her hands and let Lily lead her to the main room, where they settled into a worn armchair together. The child fit against her side like she belonged there, warm and trusting in a way that made Elena's heart ache. "What kind of story do you want?" Elena asked. "A happy one, where nobody dies." The request was so simple and so devastating. Elena stroked Lily's hair gently. "All right, a happy story where nobody dies. Let me think." She spun a tale about a brave rabbit who made friends with a fox and taught him to eat vegetables instead of rabbits, and they lived together in a burrow beneath a great oak tree. It was silly and childish, but Lily hung on every word, her eyes growing heavy as the story progressed. By the end, the child was asleep against Elena's shoulder, breathing soft and even. Elena sat still, not wanting to wake her, and looked up to find Silas watching from the kitchen doorway. "She hasn't let anyone hold her like that since her mother died," he said quietly. "Grace tries, but Lily knows Grace is just a child herself. She's been waiting for an adult to trust." Elena looked down at the sleeping girl. "She barely knows me. Children know things adults forget. They sense who's safe and who's not." Silas crossed the room and carefully lifted Lily from Elena's arms. "I'll put her to bed. Grace will want to say goodnight." He carried his daughter upstairs with the practiced ease of long experience. Elena sat in the armchair, feeling the warmth where Lily had been pressed against her side, and tried to understand what was happening to her. She'd been here less than 2 full days, and already these children were burrowing into her heart like seeds taking root in fertile soil. Grace appeared with Daniel in tow. "We're going up," the girl announced. Then more quietly, "Thank you for today, for letting me—" She stopped, searching for words. "For letting you be a child?" Elena finished gently. Grace nodded, blinking hard against tears that seemed always close to the surface. "Yeah, for that. You're welcome. Now go on up. Tomorrow we'll start teaching you how to just be in charge of yourself instead of the whole household." The girl managed a small smile and herded Daniel toward the stairs. Elena was left alone in the main room, listening to the sounds of the house settling for the night, Footsteps overhead, the creak of bed frames, muffled voices saying goodnight. She should go upstairs herself. The day had been long and tomorrow would start before sunrise again. But she found herself drawn to the front porch, stepping out into the summer night that was finally mercifully cooler than the day had been. The stars were impossible here, away from any town lights, thousands upon thousands of them scattered across the black sky like salt spilled on a dark table. Elena had never seen so many stars. In town, you could see maybe a few dozen. But here, you could understand why ancient people believed the heavens were crowded with gods and stories. Beautiful, isn't it? She started. Silas had emerged from the house silently, settling into one of the porch chairs. Elena remained standing near the railing, suddenly aware they were alone together for the first time since she'd arrived. "I've never seen anything like it," she admitted. "The frontier takes as much as it gives, but the sky, that's something it gives freely." He was quiet for a moment. "You did well today. The children are settling with you faster than I expected. Grace is desperate for help. Lily is desperate for mothering. Daniel is watching, still deciding. Daniel's cautious. Can't blame him, but he helped you with dishes without being told. That's progress." Silas leaned back in his chair, studying her in the darkness. "You're not what I expected when I made arrangements with your father." Elena turned to face him. "What did you expect? Someone broken, or bitter, or calculating, looking for angles and advantages. Not someone who'd notice my daughter was exhausted and actually do something about it. I'm not a saint, Mr. Rowe. I'm just a woman who knows what it's like to carry too much too young." Elena gripped the porch railing. "My mother died when I was 12. My brother left 2 years later. I ran my father's house until he drank and gambled away everything we had, including me. So when I see Grace trying to hold the world together with 10-year-old hands, I recognize it. I lived it." Understanding flickered across Silas's face. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. It taught me how to survive, how to work, how to keep going when everything says to give up." She paused. "It also taught me that sometimes the only way forward is to accept help from unexpected places, even when it comes wrapped in transactions and debt." This arrangement, Silas stood, moving to the railing beside her but maintaining careful distance. "I want you to understand something. I paid your father's debt. That's settled. But you're not property. You're not owned. If you want to leave, I'll give you money for passage and letters of reference. You can go whenever you choose." Elena stared at him. "You'd let me leave? After paying I paid to keep you out of Brennan's hands and to give my children help they desperately needed. You've given them 2 good days. If you give them a week, a month, a year, that's your choice. But I won't hold you against your will. That's not how I operate." The offer should have felt liberating. Instead, it felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, being told she could jump whenever she wanted. Freedom was terrifying when you had nowhere to land. "I'll stay," Elena said finally. "At least for now. Those children need more than a week or a month of stability, and She stopped, surprised by what she was about to say. "I need to be needed. Is that pathetic?" "No, it's human." Silas's voice was rough. "We all need purpose, need to matter to someone. There's no shame in that." They stood in silence, looking out over the dark valley. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, lonely and wild. The sound made Elena shiver despite the lingering heat. "You should get some rest," Silas said. "Tomorrow's Sunday. We don't work as hard, but there's still livestock to tend and meals to make. After morning chores, we usually spend the afternoon quiet. Reading, resting, being together. You're welcome to join us or take time for yourself. I'll join you, if that's all right." "More than all right." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Elena, what I said about Brennan, about staying alert, I meant it. This peace we have right now won't last. When he realizes I've interfered with his plans, there'll be consequences. I need you to be ready." "I will be." Silas nodded and went inside. Elena remained on the porch a few minutes longer, letting the night settle around her like a cloak. Somewhere out there, Cyrus Brennan was planning his next move. Somewhere out there, danger circled and waited. But here, inside this house, 3 children slept safely, and a family she barely knew was starting to trust her. She'd been sold like property and delivered to a stranger's door. But standing under this impossible sky, Elena realized she'd also been given something unexpected, a chance to build a life from the ruins of her old one, a chance to matter to someone again. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Brennan would make his move eventually. The heat would continue its relentless assault. Life on the frontier would demand its daily toll of sweat and sacrifice. But tonight, Elena Hart belonged somewhere. And for now, that was enough. She went inside, bolted the door as Silas had instructed, and climbed the stairs to her small room. Through the thin walls, she could hear the sounds of the household sleeping, Grace's steady breathing, Lily's occasional murmur, the creak of Silas moving in his room at the front of the house, the sounds of a family. Her family now, in whatever complicated way this arrangement made them hers. Elena lay down on her narrow bed and closed her eyes, letting exhaustion pull her under. Outside, the cicadas sang their endless summer song, and the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the small human dramas playing out beneath them. But in this house, in this valley, on this piece of contested frontier land, Elena's presence mattered. She'd given an exhausted child permission to rest. She'd held a motherless girl until she slept. She'd started to build something that looked almost like belonging. And when morning came with its roosters and its merciless sun, she'd wake and do it all over again, one day at a time, one small act of care at a time, until these borrowed connections became real, until a transaction became something close to family, until summer's heat finally broke and the land remembered how to be gentle again. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Elena lay in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the house and trying not to think about Cyrus Brennan or what he might do when he discovered she'd slipped through his fingers. But her mind refused to settle, circling back again and again to Silas's warning about staying alert, about men who might come claiming she belonged to them, about violence that could arrive without warning in the summer darkness. When she finally dozed off, her dreams were fragmented and uneasy. Her father's face as he took Silas's money, the feeling of being sold like cattle at market, riders approaching through clouds of dust with intentions she couldn't see but could feel like static before a lightning strike. She woke before dawn to the sound of horses, multiple horses, moving fast, coming closer. Elena sat bolt upright, heart hammering. Through her window, she could see lantern light moving in the yard below, hear men's voices raised in anger. She grabbed her wrapper and rushed to the door, yanking it open just as Grace appeared in the hallway, eyes wide with fear. "Someone's here," the girl whispered. "A lot of someone's." Downstairs, they heard Silas's voice, hard and commanding. "You're on my property uninvited. State your business or get the hell off my land." Elena grabbed Grace's hand. "Get Daniel and Lily, root cellar, now." "But Pa, your father told me what to do if riders came. Go." "I'll handle this." Grace hesitated only a second before racing toward the other bedrooms. Elena descended the stairs quickly, her bare feet silent on the wood. Through the front window, she could see at least 6 mounted men in the yard, their faces harsh in the lantern light. Silas stood on the porch in his undershirt and work pants, his rifle held loose but ready across his chest. Tom Bridger stood beside him, similarly armed. The man at the center of the riders sat tall in his saddle, well-dressed even at this ungodly hour, his face sharp and calculating beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Cyrus Brennan. Elena knew it without being told. "Your business is my business, Ro," Brennan said, his voice smooth and cultured, the voice of someone who'd learned to use words as weapons. "You have something that belongs to me. I've come to collect. I have nothing of yours. Everything on this property is mine, bought and paid for legal." "The girl, Elena Hart. Her father owed me a debt, and she was the agreed-upon payment. You interfered with a legal transaction." Silas's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Legal? You got a drunk man to sign away his daughter like she was a horse. That's not legal, Brennan. That's exploitation. And even if it were legal, I paid Hart's debt in full and then some. The transaction settled. With money that should have gone to me first, for prior debts. You knew what you were doing, Ro. You deliberately undermined my claim. Your claim to a human being. Yes, I deliberately undermined that. And I'd do it again. The tension in the yard thickened like smoke. Elena could see Brennan's men shifting in their saddles, hands moving toward weapons. Behind her, she heard the soft scuff of bare feet. Grace had gotten the younger children to the root cellar and come back. Of course she had. The girl couldn't stay away when her father was in danger. "Grace," Elena whispered without turning. "Stay behind the door. If shooting starts, you run back to Daniel and Lily. You understand?" "Yes, ma'am." The girl's voice was small but steady. Outside, Brennan was still talking, his tone turning silky and dangerous. "Here's what's going to happen, Ro. You're going to bring the girl out here. She's going to come with me of her own free will. Won't you, Miss Hart?" Elena's breath caught. He knew she was listening, knew she was inside. "She'll confirm that her father promised her to me first, and that your interference was unwanted. Then we'll all ride away peaceful, and you can go back to your quiet little ranch without any trouble. Doesn't that sound reasonable?" "You're talking about kidnapping," Silas said flatly. "I'm talking about collecting a debt. There's a difference." "Not in my eyes. Or in the law's eyes once I report this to the territorial marshal." Brennan's laugh was genuine this time, full of real amusement. "The marshal? You mean the man whose salary I pay? The man who owes his position to my recommendation? Please, Ro, be realistic. The law out here is what I say it is. You should have learned that by now." In that moment, Elena understood the full scope of what Silas had been fighting against. This wasn't just one man trying to acquire land. This was systematic power, corruption that ran through every official channel, leaving no legitimate recourse for someone who stood in the way. "Elena," Silas's voice rang out clearly. "If you're listening, you stay inside. You don't come out here no matter what he says. You're under my protection, and that protection doesn't end just because he showed up with 6 men. 6 men who are armed and ready," Brennan countered. "Whereas you've got yourself one aging ranch hand and a few more workers in the bunkhouse who'd be smart enough not to die for someone else's fight. Think about it, Ro. Think about your children sleeping upstairs. Think about what happens if this turns violent." The threat was naked now, stripped of all pretense. Elena felt rage kindle in her chest, bright and hot. She'd been sold by her father, claimed by Brennan, purchased by Silas, and now these men were discussing her fate like she was a piece of disputed property with no voice of her own. Enough. She moved before Grace could stop her, crossing to the door and yanking it open. The night air hit her face, still warm despite the hour, and every eye in the yard swung toward her. "Miss Hart, get back inside," Silas said sharply. Elena ignored him, stepping fully onto the porch. She was aware of how she must look. Barefoot, wrapped in her nightclothes, hair loose down her back, but she drew herself up straight and met Brennan's eyes across the distance. "You want to hear from me? Fine. I'll speak." Her voice cut through the tension like a blade. "My father sold me to settle his debts. That was his choice, his shame. But I am not a horse or a piece of land or anything else you can own. Mr. Rowe paid my father's debt in full and offered me work here caring for his children. I accepted. There was no prior claim, no legal obligation. Just a drunk man's promise to another man who makes his living exploiting the desperate." Brennan's smile didn't waver, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "Strong words from a girl with nowhere else to go." "Maybe, but they're true words, and I'm staying here, not because I'm forced to, but because I choose to. Now get off this property before someone gets hurt over your bruised pride." For a long moment, no one moved. The horses shifted restlessly, sensing the tension. Somewhere in the distance, a nightbird called. Elena could feel Grace's terrified breathing behind her, hear Tom Bridger's muttered curse, sense Silas's furious concern radiating like heat. Then Brennan laughed, the sound low and genuinely amused. "You've got spirit. I'll give you that. It's almost a shame." He gathered his reins, preparing to turn his horse. "But this isn't over, Ro. You've made an enemy tonight. I promise you'll regret it." "I've had enemies before. I'm still here." "We'll see how long that lasts." Brennan's gaze swept over Elena one more time, assessing and cold. "When you get tired of playing house with a widower and his brats, you know where to find me. The offer will still stand, for a while." He wheeled his horse and rode out, his men following. They disappeared into the darkness like smoke, leaving only settling dust and the echo of hoofbeats. The silence that followed felt fragile, like glass ready to shatter. Silas lowered his rifle slowly, his jaw tight with barely controlled anger. Tom let out a long breath and spat into the dirt. "That was foolish, Miss Elena," Tom said, but his voice held respect underneath the criticism. "Could have gotten yourself shot stepping out here like that. Could have gotten us all shot if I'd stayed hidden like I was ashamed or afraid." Elena's hands were shaking now, adrenaline draining away and leaving her hollow. He needed to hear that I chose this, that I wasn't stolen property he could claim back. Silas turned to face her fully, and the expression on his face was complicated. Anger, concern, and something else she couldn't quite read. "You shouldn't have put yourself at risk. And you shouldn't have to fight my battles alone. This concerns me. I have a right to speak." Speaking is one thing. Walking into a situation where 6 armed men might start shooting is another. He ran a hand through his hair, clearly struggling with frustration and reluctant admiration. "But you're right. You did choose this, and Brennan needed to hear it from you directly." Grace burst through the door, launching herself at her father and wrapping her arms around his waist. "I thought he was going to shoot you. I thought—" "Hush now. Everyone's safe." Silas held his daughter close, his rifle still in one hand. "Tom, rouse Jake and the other hands. I want men watching the property line in shifts for the rest of the night. Brennan's not done with us." "Already on it, boss." Tom headed toward the bunkhouse, moving with surprising speed for his age. Silas looked at Elena over Grace's head. "Get the other children. Bring them upstairs. I want everyone in the house until sunrise." Elena nodded and headed for the root cellar, her legs feeling unsteady beneath her. She found Daniel and Lily huddled together in the darkness among the jars of preserves and sacks of potatoes. Lily was crying quietly, and Daniel had his arm around her, trying to be brave despite the fear playing on his young face. "It's all right," Elena said softly, kneeling beside them. "The men are gone. Your father's safe. Let's go back inside." She carried Lily up the ladder while Daniel climbed behind them. Back in the house, Silas had lit lamps in the main room and was checking the locks on all the windows. Grace clung to his side like a shadow, unwilling to let him out of her sight. "Children," Silas said, his voice gentle despite the tension still radiating from him, "I need you to listen carefully. That man who came tonight, Mr. Brennan, he might try to cause trouble for us, but I want you to know that you're safe. I won't let anyone hurt you or take what's ours. Do you understand?" Daniel nodded seriously. Lily just buried her face in Elena's shoulder. Grace looked at her father with eyes too knowing for a 10-year-old. "Is this because of Elena?" Grace asked quietly. "Because you helped her instead of letting that man have her?" Silas's jaw worked. "It's because Brennan wants our land and he'll use any excuse to pressure us into selling. Elena was just another tool he tried to use. But yes, me interfering with his plans made him angry." "Good," Grace said fiercely. "Let him be angry. You did the right thing." Pride flickered across Silas's face. "That's my girl. Now I want you 3 to go back upstairs. Try to sleep if you can. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." Grace took Lily from Elena's arms and herded Daniel toward the stairs. At the landing, she turned back. "Thank you, Elena, for being brave out there, for standing up to him." Then they were gone, leaving Elena and Silas alone in the lamplit room. The silence stretched between them, thick with everything unsaid. "You could have been killed," Silas said finally, his voice rough. "You realize that? If Brennan had decided to make an example, if one of his men had gotten trigger-happy, I know. But I couldn't hide while you fought for my right to choose my own path. It wouldn't have been right. Right doesn't stop bullets. No, but sometimes you have to risk the bullets to prove you're not property to be claimed." Elena met his eyes squarely. "I meant what I said out there. I chose this. I choose to stay here, to help with your children, to be part of this household. Not because I'm owned or obligated, but because this is where I want to be." Something shifted in Silas's expression, the anger draining away and leaving something softer, more vulnerable. "Why? You've been here 3 days. You barely know us. You could take the money I offered and start fresh somewhere. Brennan's never heard of you." And leave Grace to collapse under the weight she's carrying? Leave Lily without someone to tell her stories? Leave Daniel to grow up too fast trying to be the man of the house? Elena shook her head. I've been where Grace is. I know what it's like to have no one notice you're drowning because you're treading water so hard you look fine from the shore. I won't abandon her, or any of you. Silas stared at her for a long moment, and Elena saw him truly considering her for the first time, not as a purchase or a solution to his household problems, but as a person making an active choice to stand with his family against what was coming. Brennan meant what he said, Silas told her quietly. This isn't over. He'll find other ways to apply pressure. He might spread lies in town, turn people against us. He might try to interfere with my cattle sales or my credit. He might... He stopped. The possibility's too dark to voice. It's going to get harder before it gets better. Then we'll face it together. You, me, Tom, the children. This household against whatever Brennan throws at us. You're either very brave or very foolish. Probably both. Elena managed a small smile. But I'm here, and I'm staying, so you'd better get used to it. For the first time since she'd arrived, Silas smiled back, a real smile that transformed his weathered face and made him look years younger. All right then, we do this together. But Elena, his expression turned serious again. From now on, you don't take unnecessary risks. You don't confront armed men alone. You don't put yourself in danger trying to prove points. Agreed? Agreed. As long as you promise the same. I'm the one with the rifle and 20 years of frontier experience. And I'm the one who just faced down Cyrus Brennan in her nightclothes. I'd say we're even. Silas's laugh was surprised and genuine. Fair enough. Now go get some sleep. Dawn's coming whether we're ready or not, and tomorrow we need to fortify this place properly. Elena climbed the stairs slowly, exhaustion finally catching up with her. In her room, she found Grace sitting on the floor outside her door, clearly having left her own bed to stand guard. Grace, what are you doing? Making sure you're safe, in case they come back. Elena's heart cracked wide open. She knelt beside the girl and pulled her into a tight embrace. You don't have to protect me, sweetheart. That's not your job. Everyone's my job, Grace whispered against her shoulder. Keeping everyone safe is what I do. Not anymore. Not alone. Elena held her close, feeling the girl's thin shoulders shake with suppressed sobs. From now on, we protect each other, all of us together. You don't have to carry this by yourself. Grace cried then, really cried, the way she probably hadn't let herself cry since her mother died. Elena held her through it, rocking slightly, murmuring wordless comfort until the storm passed and Grace pulled back, wiping her face roughly. I'm sorry, I shouldn't. You should. You absolutely should. You've been strong for so long, Grace. It's all right to let someone else be strong for you sometimes. The girl looked at her with red-rimmed eyes. You're really staying, even after tonight? Even knowing what Mr. Brennan might do? I'm really staying, I promise. Grace nodded, something settling in her expression. Okay then. She stood up, brushing off her nightgown. I should go back to Lily. She gets scared when I'm not there. Go on. And Grace, you were incredibly brave tonight. Your mother would be proud. The girl's face crumpled briefly, then steadied. She nodded once and disappeared down the hallway. Elena finally entered her own room and closed the door, leaning against it as the night's events caught up with her all at once. She'd confronted a dangerous man. She'd committed herself to staying despite the threats. She'd seen the violence that simmered just beneath the surface of frontier life, waiting to explode into gunfire and bloodshed. And through it all, she'd discovered something unexpected. She wasn't afraid. Or rather, she was afraid, but the fear didn't paralyze her. Instead, it sharpened her resolve. These people, this family she barely knew, had become worth fighting for in the space of 3 days. Worth standing up to armed men for. Worth staying for, even when leaving would be safer. Elena climbed into bed and lay staring at the ceiling, watching shadows dance from the lamplight downstairs. Outside, she could hear the ranch hands taking up their watch positions, Tom's voice giving quiet orders, the household settling into a new reality, one where danger was no longer theoretical, but present and immediate. Tomorrow, they'd strengthen the defenses. Tomorrow, they'd prepare for whatever Brennan might try next. Tomorrow, the hard work of standing their ground would truly begin. But tonight, Elena had claimed her place in this family, had stood on that porch and declared herself not property, but a person making her own choices, had looked Cyrus Brennan in the eye and told him he had no power over her. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. She closed her eyes and let exhaustion pull her under, dreams already forming of the days ahead, of conflict and courage, of a household learning to trust her presence, of summer heat that would only intensify before it finally broke. Outside, the cicadas resumed their endless song, and the stars continued their slow wheel across the sky. The frontier night held its breath, waiting to see what morning would bring. And in the main room downstairs, Silas Rowe sat alone with his rifle across his knees, keeping watch over the family he'd built from grief and the woman who'd walked into their lives carrying her own share of scars and strength. The summer had just begun. The real heat was still to come, but they'd face it together now. A widower, 3 orphaned children, and a woman who'd been sold like property and chosen instead to claim her own worth. Against Cyrus Brennan and his power, against the merciless frontier, against whatever trials summer's burning days would bring, together. Dawn came too soon and too bright, the sun rising over the valley like an accusation. Elena woke with her muscles sore from tension and her mind already racing through the previous night's confrontation. She could hear movement downstairs. Silas was already up, probably hadn't slept at all. The thought pulled her from bed despite her exhaustion. She dressed quickly and descended to find him at the kitchen table, coffee already made, studying what looked like property maps spread across the worn wood. His eyes were shadowed with fatigue, and he hadn't shaved, giving him a rough, dangerous look she hadn't seen before. "You should have slept," Elena said quietly, moving to pour herself coffee. "Couldn't. Too much to plan." He gestured at the maps. "Brennan owns everything east of here now. Bought out the Morrison place last month, and the widow Jensen sold to him 2 weeks ago. We're surrounded on 3 sides. The only direction we can move freely is west toward the territorial road, and even that he could block if he wanted to pressure us hard enough." Elena studied the maps, seeing the strategic problem clearly. The Rowe Ranch was becoming an island in a sea of Brennan's holdings. What does he really want? Just the land? Control. The whole valley. There's talk the railroad might push through here in the next 5 years. If it does, whoever controls the land controls the route, the stations, the water rights. Brennan's betting on that future. He wants a monopoly. Silas rubbed his face tiredly. "I'm the last holdout. Everyone else either sold or got pressured out. So this was always coming, whether I was here or not." "Yes, but you gave him an excuse to escalate. Before it was just business pressure. Now it's personal. He doesn't like being defied, especially not publicly, especially not by a woman." Silas looked at her directly. "I won't lie to you, Elena. This is going to get worse before it gets better. He'll come at us from angles we can't predict. The question is whether we can hold out long enough for him to decide we're not worth the trouble. And if he decides we are worth the trouble, then we fight and hope we're still standing when it's over." The brutal honesty of it settled over Elena like the morning heat already building outside. She'd chosen this, but hearing the reality laid out so starkly made her stomach clench. Still, she'd meant what she'd said last night. She wasn't running. Grace appeared at the bottom of the stairs, looking small and worried in the morning light. "Pa, is everything all right?" Silas's expression softened immediately. "Everything's fine, sweetheart. Just planning some improvements to the ranch. You hungry?" "A little." Grace moved closer, eyeing the maps with the too knowing gaze Elena was getting used to. "Those are property boundaries. You're looking at how much land Mr. Brennan owns now." Silas didn't try to hide the truth from her. "I am. But you don't need to worry about that. That's grown-up business." "Grown-up business affects us too," Grace said quietly. "I'm not stupid, Pa. I know what's happening." The conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door, sharp, urgent, demanding. Silas was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand, before Elena could blink. Tom Bridger's voice came through the wood. "Boss, we got trouble at the east fence line." Silas yanked open the door. Tom stood there, hat in hand, his weathered face grim. "Found it this morning during patrol. Someone cut the wire in 3 places overnight." Cattle got through. We're missing maybe 20 head so far, and they're scattered toward Brennan's property. Son of a... Silas bit off the curse, mindful of Grace listening. How many hands do we have available? Jake's still sleeping off whatever he was drinking last night, but I got Miller and the Hendricks brothers ready to ride. We can round up most of the cattle if we move fast. Do it. And Tom, watch for ambush. This might be a setup to get us off the property. Silas turned to Elena, his face hard. Keep the children inside. Don't let anyone in except Tom or me. The rifle's still in my room if you need it. I know where it is. Elena forced her voice steady despite the fear curling in her gut. Be careful. Silas nodded, already moving. He grabbed his hat and gun belt, strapping them on with practiced efficiency. At the door, he paused and looked back at Grace. You're in charge until I get back. Help Elena keep your brother and sister safe. Then he was gone. Tom following, their boots loud on the porch boards before fading into the morning. Through the window, Elena watched them mount up and ride east, dust rising behind their horses like smoke signals. Grace stood very still, her small face pale. He thinks Mr. Brennan might try something while Pa's away from the house. Maybe, but we're going to be smart and careful, and everything will be fine. Elena tried to project confidence she didn't entirely feel. Let's get breakfast started. Daniel and Lily will be up soon, and we need to keep things as normal as possible for them. They worked together in tense silence, Elena frying eggs and salt pork while Grace set the table and mixed cornmeal for Johnny cakes. When Daniel appeared, rubbing sleep from his eyes, Grace's entire demeanor shifted, becoming lighter, more childlike, protecting her younger brother from the worry she carried. Morning, Daniel. We're having a big breakfast because Pa and Tom had to ride out early to check the fences. They'll be back soon. Daniel wasn't fooled. His eyes went to the window, tracking the direction they'd ridden. Something happened. Nothing we can't handle, Elena said firmly. Now wash up and help your sister with the table. Lily came down last, dragging her rag doll and looking uncertain. Elena scooped her up, settling her on her hip while she finished cooking. The little girl wrapped her arms around Elena's neck and held on tight. Where's Papa? Working. He'll be home for lunch. Elena hoped it was true. They ate breakfast in the quiet house, the absence of Silas and the ranch hands making everything feel hollow and exposed. Elena kept glancing out the window, watching for riders, for trouble, for anything that might be coming. The morning stretched long and anxious. Around mid-morning, Grace was helping Elena with laundry when they heard a horse approaching. Elena's heart jumped into her throat, but it was just one rider, and as he came closer, she recognized Jake Morrison's slouching posture. He dismounted in the yard, moving slowly like his head hurt. When he knocked, Elena answered but kept the door mostly closed, blocking his view inside. Morning, Miss Hart. Boss around? He rode out with Tom. Fence trouble. Jake's eyes narrowed slightly. That's so. Nobody told me. Tom said you were indisposed. Elena kept her voice neutral, but she saw the flash of anger in Jake's expression. Well, I'm here now. Might as well make myself useful. I'll just come in and wait for the boss to get back. That won't be necessary. I'll tell Mr. Rowe you came by when he returns. Now, Miss Hart, that's not very friendly. It's hot out here, and I could use some water at least. Jake took a step closer to the door, and Elena saw his eyes trying to look past her into the house. You alone in there with the children? Warning bells clanged in Elena's mind. I said Mr. Rowe will hear you came by. Good day, Mr. Morrison. She started to close the door, but Jake's hand shot out, stopping it. His friendly facade dropped away, replaced by something uglier. You know what I think? I think Brennan's got the right idea about you. Spirited little thing, thinking you can tell men what to do. Someone needs to teach you your place. Elena's pulse hammered, but she kept her voice steady. Take your hand off the door, or I'll make you regret it. You'll make me... Jake laughed, pushing harder against the door. What are you going to do? You're just a girl playing house with a man who bought you like... The sound of a rifle being cocked cut through his words like a knife. Grace stood behind Elena, Silas's rifle raised and pointed directly at Jake's chest. The weapon looked enormous in her small hands, but she held it steady, her face hard with determination. She said, "Take your hand off the door," Grace said, her voice cold and clear. "Step back, or I shoot you. My pa taught me how." Jake's face went white, then red with rage. But he stepped back, hands rising slightly. "You little—" "The boss is going to hear about this," pointing a gun at one of his own men. "You're not his man if you threaten his household," Grace said. "And he'll hear about it from me. Now get off our property before I decide your intentions were worse than they were." For a moment, Elena thought Jake might try something stupid, but common sense prevailed over pride. He backed toward his horse, mounting clumsily, his eyes promising retribution. "This isn't over," he said. "Yes, it is. You're fired. Don't come back." Grace's voice didn't waver. Jake spurred his horse hard and rode off toward the bunkhouse, presumably to gather his things. Elena closed and bolted the door, her hands shaking now that the immediate danger had passed. She turned to find Grace lowering the rifle carefully, her own hands trembling. "Grace, I had to. He was going to hurt you, or worse." The girl's voice cracked. "I couldn't let him." Elena pulled her into a fierce embrace, the rifle carefully between them. "You were so brave, so incredibly brave, but you shouldn't have had to do that. You're 10 years old." "I'm the oldest. It's my job to protect everyone when Pa's not here." "No, sweetheart, it's not. But you did it anyway, and you might have just saved us from something terrible." Elena held her close, feeling the girl shake with delayed reaction. "Your father is going to be so proud of you, and so angry that Jake put you in that position." Daniel appeared in the doorway, eyes huge. "Is he gone? I kept Lily upstairs like Grace told me to before she got the rifle." "Good boy. He's gone." Elena released Grace and knelt to Daniel's level. "But we need to tell your father everything as soon as he gets back. Everything Jake said, everything that happened. Can you remember it all?" Daniel nodded seriously. "Every word. I was listening from the stairs." They waited together in the main room, the rifle now resting against the wall within easy reach. Elena tried to keep the children occupied with quiet activities, but everyone's attention kept drifting to the windows, watching for Silas's return. He rode in just after noon, dusty and exhausted, Tom and the other hands trailing behind him. They'd recovered most of the scattered cattle, but the damage was done. Time lost, resources wasted. The clear message that Brennan could strike at them whenever he chose. Elena met Silas at the door, and something in her expression made him tense immediately. "What happened?" "Jake Morrison happened. Grace had to pull a rifle on him to get him off the property." The color drained from Silas's face. "Grace did what?" Grace stepped forward, chin up despite her obvious fear of her father's reaction. "He tried to force his way into the house when Elena told him to leave. He said terrible things. So I got your rifle and told him to go, and that he was fired." Silas looked from his daughter to Elena and back again, his jaw working. Finally, he knelt in front of Grace, taking her hands in his. "Tell me exactly what he said. Every word." Grace recounted it all, her voice steady until she got to the part where Jake had pushed against the door. Then she faltered, and Daniel picked up the story from where he'd been listening on the stairs. Between the two children, the full picture emerged: Jake's threatening behavior, his crude implications, his clear intention to intimidate or worse. When they finished, Silas stood slowly. His face was carved from stone, but his eyes burned with a rage Elena had never seen before. "Tom!" he called toward the door. The older man appeared instantly. "Boss?" "Jake Morrison still on the property?" "Last I saw, he was packing his gear from the bunkhouse." "Good. I want him gone within the hour. If he's not, I'm dragging him off myself." Silas's voice was deadly quiet. "And spread the word to every ranch within 50 miles. Jake Morrison is not to be hired, not to be trusted, not to be given shelter. He threatened my family. That doesn't get forgiven or forgotten." Tom nodded grimly. "I'll see to it personally. And boss, I'm sorry. I knew he was trouble, but I didn't think he'd—" "Not your fault. Mine for keeping him on as long as I did." Silas turned back to his children. "Grace, you did exactly right. I'm proud of you, even though I'm terrified you had to do it. Daniel, good work protecting Lily and remembering everything. And Elena," he looked at her with something complicated in his expression, "thank you for keeping them safe." "Grace kept us safe," Elena corrected. "I would have tried to hold the door, but he was stronger. Grace is the one who stopped him." "Still, You held the line first. That matters. Silas pulled Grace into a tight hug, then reached out and drew Daniel in too. You're all so brave. Braver than children should have to be. But I'm going to make sure you don't have to be this brave again. I promise you that. Over the next several hours, the household settled into a new normal defined by heightened vigilance. Tom personally supervised Jake's departure, making sure he left with nothing but what he'd arrived with. The other hands, Miller and the Hendricks brothers, were brought up to the house and briefed on the situation. All three pledged their loyalty and their willingness to help defend the property if it came to that. We knew something like this was brewing, Miller said, a solid man in his 30s with steady hands and honest eyes. Brennan's been circling for months. We're with you, boss. All the way. Dinner that night was subdued despite Elena's efforts to cook something special, roasted chicken from the hen that had stopped laying, with potatoes and the last of the early peas from the garden. The food was good, but everyone ate mechanically, minds elsewhere. After the children were in bed, Elena found Silas on the porch again, staring out at the darkness. She brought him coffee and sat in the chair beside him without asking permission. You can't keep watch every night, she said quietly. You'll collapse. I'll sleep when I know they're safe. They're as safe tonight as they were yesterday. You need rest, Silas. You're no good to them exhausted. He turned to look at her, and in the lamplight from inside, she saw the exhaustion etched deep in his face. He could have hurt them today. Jake could have gotten inside, He stopped, unable to voice the possibilities. And I wasn't here. But nothing happened. Grace was prepared because you taught her. The children knew what to do because you've trained them. And Jake's gone now, never to return. Elena set her coffee down and leaned forward. You can't protect them from everything, Silas. The frontier doesn't allow it, but you've given them the tools to protect themselves. That has to be enough. Does it? Because from where I'm sitting, I bought you to help with my children, and instead I've dragged you into a war with a man who has resources and reach I can't match. You didn't drag me anywhere. I walked into this with my eyes open. Elena met his gaze steadily. And I'm still here, still choosing to stay. When are you going to believe that? Silas studied her for a long moment. I believe you mean it. What I can't figure out is why. You barely know us. You owe us nothing. I owe Grace everything. She reminded me what it feels like to be needed, to matter to someone. I owe Daniel the chance to see that adults can keep their promises. I owe Lily the simple gift of being held and told stories. Elena paused. And I owe you, well, I'm not entirely sure yet, but I think I owe you honesty. So here it is. I'm not staying just for the children. I'm staying because for the first time in years, I feel like I'm building something instead of watching everything crumble. Does that make sense? More than you know. Silas's voice was rough. After my wife died, everything felt like holding on by my fingernails, trying to keep the ranch running, keep the children fed and clothed and safe, keep myself from falling apart, and I was failing at all of it. Grace was drowning under responsibilities she shouldn't have had. Daniel was turning hard and suspicious. Lily stopped talking for 3 months. He looked down at his hands. Then you walked into our lives, and in less than a week, I've watched my children start to heal. Grace is resting. Lily is laughing. Daniel is letting his guard down just a little. That's because of you. That's because they needed someone to see them. Anyone would have... No, not anyone. Silas's eyes were intense. It had to be someone who understood what they were carrying, someone who'd carried it themselves and survived, someone with strength wrapped in gentleness. That's you, Elena. You're exactly what they needed, what we needed. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning Elena wasn't entirely ready to examine. The air felt thick, charged with something that had nothing to do with the summer heat still radiating from the earth. Silas? A shout from the direction of the eastern property line cut through the night. Both of them were on their feet instantly, Silas grabbing his rifle from where it leaned against the porch rail. Tom came running from the bunkhouse, and the other hands appeared moments later. Fire! Tom gasped, pointing. The eastern pasture is burning. In the distance, Elena could see the orange glow against the darkness, flames spreading fast through the dry summer grass. The fire was still far enough away that the main buildings weren't in immediate danger, But if the wind shifted or if it spread unchecked, it could consume everything. "Wake the children," Silas ordered Elena. "Get them dressed and ready to evacuate if necessary. Tom, get the horses hitched to the wagon. Miller, Hendricks, get every bucket and barrel we have. We're going to try to contain this before it reaches the cattle pens." Elena ran inside and up the stairs, her heart pounding. She woke Grace first, explaining quickly and calmly. Grace was up and moving immediately, helping to wake Daniel and Lily while Elena gathered essential items, clothes, food, water, the small amount of money she knew Silas kept in a tin in the kitchen. Downstairs, Silas was organizing the firefighting effort with military precision. "The wind's blowing east to west, which buys us time. If we can create a firebreak along this line," he traced it on one of his maps, "we might be able to stop it before it reaches the buildings." "How did it start?" Elena asked, though she already knew the answer. "It didn't start itself. Someone set it deliberately, probably while we were dealing with Jake and distracted." Silas's face was grim. "Brennan's making good on his threat. He's going to destroy us piece by piece until we have nothing left to defend. Then we stop him. Tonight, tomorrow. However many times it takes." Elena surprised herself with the ferocity in her voice. "This is our home. We don't let him burn it down." Silas looked at her with something like wonder. Then he nodded sharply. "Tom will stay here with you and the children. If the fire gets within a quarter-mile of the house, you take the wagon west toward the territorial road. Don't wait for us. Just go. And if you don't come back, then you take care of them. Promise me, Elena. If this goes wrong, you get them to safety and you don't look back." The weight of what he was asking settled over her like a physical thing. He was naming her guardian of his children, giving her that responsibility and trust. "I promise. But you're coming back. All of you." Silas touched her face briefly, a gesture so unexpected and tender that Elena's breath caught. Then he was gone, running toward the fire with Miller and the Hendricks brothers, carrying buckets and shovels and desperate determination. Elena stood with the children on the porch, Tom beside them with his rifle, watching the orange glow in the distance. Grace held Lily, while Daniel pressed against Elena's side. They could hear shouting, the sounds of men fighting the fire with everything they had. "Papa's going to stop it," Lily said with the absolute faith of a 4-year-old. "Yes, he is," Elena agreed, praying it was true. The night stretched endless and terrible. The glow didn't grow closer, but it didn't shrink either. Elena kept the children occupied as best she could, but all eyes kept drifting to those distant flames, to the battle being waged in the darkness. Finally, as the first gray light of false dawn touched the sky, the orange glow began to diminish. The shouting changed in timbre, less desperate, more controlled. And then, as true dawn broke, Silas and the hands came trudging back, blackened with soot and smoke, exhausted but alive. "We stopped it," Silas said hoarsely, accepting the water Elena thrust into his hands. "Lost about 50 acres of pasture and some fence line, but we stopped it before it reached anything critical." The children swarmed him, not caring about the soot or the smell of smoke, just needing to touch him and confirm he was whole. Silas held them all, his eyes meeting Elena's over their heads. In that look, Elena saw everything they hadn't said on the porch the night before. The recognition of what they were building together. The acknowledgement that this was no longer just an arrangement of convenience, but something deeper, forged in crisis and sealed with trust. Brennan had thrown everything he could at them in less than 48 hours. Cut fences, scattered cattle, sent a threatening employee, and set their land on fire. And they'd survived it all, battered but unbroken. The question was what he'd try next, and whether they could keep standing when he did. But as Elena watched Silas with his children, as she felt the weight of the promises she'd made and the responsibilities she'd accepted, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. And that made all the difference. The week following the fire moved with the slow, tense rhythm of a held breath. Silas and the hands worked from dawn until dark, rebuilding fence lines and clearing the burned pasture. Elena kept the household running with Grace's help, though the girl no longer carried the weight alone. They'd settled into a partnership, easy and natural, where Elena handled the heavy work and Grace managed the smaller details that only someone who'd lived in the house her whole life would know. Daniel had started talking more, his suspicious silences giving way to questions and observations. And Lily, sweet, trusting Lily, had taken to following Elena everywhere, a small shadow that needed constant reassurance that the adults in her life weren't going to disappear like smoke. But beneath the surface calm, everyone waited for Brennan's next move. It came on a scorching afternoon when the heat seemed to press down on the valley like a physical weight, making it hard to breathe, hard to think, hard to do anything but endure. Tom rode in fast from town, his horse lathered and blowing. Silas met him in the yard, and Elena watched from the kitchen window as they talked, Tom's gestures urgent and angry. When Silas came inside, his face was carved from granite. "Brennan's filed a legal claim," he said without preamble. "Says I owe him money for damages from the cattle that wandered onto his property after the fence was cut. Claims he had to round them up and hold them, and I'm responsible for costs plus damages to his grazing land." Elena's stomach dropped. But he's the one who cut the fence. Can't prove it, and apparently the territorial magistrate who's in Brennan's pocket has ruled in his favor. I either pay $2,000 in damages or forfeit property as settlement. Silas's voice was tight with barely controlled rage. "It's a trap. He knows I don't have that kind of cash on hand. If I pay, I'm bankrupted. If I don't pay, he takes the land legally. Either way, he wins. There has to be something we can do. Appeal to a higher court, get testimony from who? Everyone who'd speak for me is either too afraid of Brennan or needs his goodwill to survive out here. The few who'd stand with me aren't credible witnesses in the magistrate's eyes. Tom's my employee. Miller and the Hendricks brothers work for me. It'd just look like loyalty, not truth." Silas slumped into a chair, suddenly looking every one of his 40 years plus 10 more. "I've been outmaneuvered. I should have seen this coming." Grace stood in the doorway, having heard everything. Her face was pale but determined. "We can't just give up. There has to be something." "Sometimes, sweetheart, there isn't. Sometimes you fight as hard as you can and still lose." The defeat in Silas's voice was worse than any anger. Elena felt something fierce and hot unfurl in her chest. She'd watched her own father give up, watched him drink and gamble away everything rather than fight. She'd been powerless then, a child whose voice meant nothing. But she wasn't powerless now, and she'd be damned if she watched Silas surrender without exhausting every possible option. "What if we went over the magistrate's head?" she asked. "Directly to the territorial governor?" "Same problem. No proof, no credible witnesses, and Brennan's got connections all the way to the capital." Silas shook his head. "I appreciate the thought, but what if we had proof?" Elena's mind was racing now. Real proof that Brennan orchestrated everything. The fence cutting, the fire, maybe even documentation of his other illegal land acquisitions. "We don't have that kind of proof. And how would we even get it? Break into his house and rifle through his papers?" The words hung in the air. Elena and Silas looked at each other, the same impossible, dangerous idea forming in both their minds simultaneously. "That's insane," Silas said. "Maybe, but it might be our only chance. Even if we could get into his house without being caught, we don't know what we're looking for or where he'd keep it, and if we're caught, it's not just the ranch we lose, it's everything. I could be arrested, hanged for trespassing and theft. The children would be left with nothing." Elena knew he was right. The risk was enormous, the odds of success slim. But doing nothing guaranteed failure. At least this gave them a chance, however desperate. "So we don't get caught," she said quietly. "We plan carefully, we move smart, and we find what we need to prove Brennan's been operating outside the law. It's a gamble, but everything worth having is." Grace cleared her throat. "I know someone who might help, someone who works in Brennan's house." Both adults turned to stare at her. Grace lifted her chin defensively. "What?" "I pay attention in town. There's a woman, Clara Reeves, who works as Brennan's housekeeper. She came to town about a year ago after her husband died. She hates Brennan. I heard her talking to Mrs. Henderson at the general store once, saying she wished she'd never taken the job, but she needed the money to feed her children." "A disgruntled employee," Elena murmured. "Someone who'd have access to his private papers and reason to want him exposed. Someone who'd also be risking everything if she got caught helping us," Silas countered. But Elena could see the spark of hope rekindling in his eyes, despite his caution. Even if she agreed, how would we approach her without Brennan finding out? "I could go," Grace said immediately. I could go to town with Elena, like we were shopping. Mrs. Reeves brings her children to the park on Sunday afternoons. We could talk to her there. Make it look like a chance meeting. Absolutely not, Silas said flatly. I'm not putting you in danger. I'm already in danger, Pa. We all are. If we lose the ranch, where do we go? What happens to us? Grace's voice cracked but held steady. Let me help, please. The plea in her voice, the desperate need to contribute something, seemed to break something in Silas. He looked at his daughter, this child who'd already been forced to be so much older than her years, and Elena saw the moment he realized he couldn't protect her from this. The threat was already at their door. The only question was whether they'd face it actively or wait for it to consume them. All right, he said finally, but Elena goes with you, and you take Tom as escort. You talk to Mrs. Reeves only if it can be done safely and privately. At the first sign of trouble, you leave immediately. Understood? Grace nodded solemnly. Elena felt the weight of responsibility settle over her shoulders like a yoke. She was about to involve a 10-year-old child in what amounted to conspiracy and potential theft. But Grace was right. They were already in danger, and this might be their only path through it. Sunday came with brutal heat and cloudless sky. Elena dressed carefully in her best dress, the only decent one she owned, brought from her old life, and helped Grace into a clean pinafore. Daniel was sullen about being left behind with his father, but Lily was happy enough to stay and help Silas with light chores. The ride to town was tense despite Tom's calm presence. He drove the wagon with practiced ease, his rifle visible but not threatening, a statement of preparedness rather than aggression. Grace sat between Tom and Elena, fidgeting with the ribbon on her dress. What if she won't help? Grace whispered. Then we find another way, Elena said with more confidence than she felt. But I think she will. People who are trapped and angry often just need someone to give them permission to act on that anger. Town was sleepy in the Sunday afternoon heat. Most people were either in church or sheltering indoors from the sun. Tom parked the wagon near the general store and settled in to wait, positioning himself where he could watch both the park and the main street. We'll be back within the hour, Elena told him. I'll be here. Tom's weathered face was kind but serious. You be careful, Miss Elena. Brennan's got eyes everywhere in this town. The park was a modest square of grass struggling to stay green despite the summer drought, with a few scraggly trees providing minimal shade. A handful of children played listlessly in the heat, while their mothers watched from benches placed in whatever shade they could find. Claire Reeves was easy to spot, a thin woman in her 30s wearing a plain dress and a haunted expression. Two children played nearby, a boy of perhaps 8 and a girl no older than 6. Both were too quiet, too watchful, the way children got when life had taught them to be cautious. Elena and Grace approached casually, settling on the bench beside Clara. The woman glanced at them, her body language immediately defensive. Mrs. Reeves, Elena said quietly. My name is Elena Hart. This is Grace Rowe. We need to speak with you about something important, something concerning your employer. Clara's face went pale. I don't know what you're talking about. I need to go. Please, Grace said urgently. Just 5 minutes. We know you hate working for Mr. Brennan. We know he's done terrible things, and we think you might be able to help stop him. Clara's hands twisted in her lap. You're Rowe's daughter, and you're the woman Brennan tried to claim. He's been raging about both of you all week. Then you know he's coming after us, Elena said. He's filed false legal claims to steal the Rowe ranch. But if we could prove he's done this before, if we could show a pattern of illegal acquisition and intimidation, we might be able to stop him. And you think I can help you prove that? Clara's laugh was bitter. Even if I wanted to, and I do, believe me I do. I'm just a housekeeper. I don't have access to his business papers. But you have access to his house, Grace said. You know his routine, where he keeps things, when he's away. Clara looked at the child with something like pity. You're asking me to spy on a man who could have me and my children thrown out with nothing. Who could blacklist me so thoroughly I'd never find work again? Who could... She stopped, but the implications were clear. I can't. I understand, Elena said softly. I do. You have children to protect, and that comes first, always. But Mrs. Reeves, What kind of world are your children growing up in if men like Brennan can destroy lives without consequences? What happens when they're older and someone like Brennan decides he wants something they have? The words hit home. Clara's eyes filled with tears. You don't know what you're asking. I do. I'm asking you to risk everything for the chance, not even the guarantee, just the chance, of making things better. It's an awful thing to ask, but we're desperate, and you're our only hope. For a long moment, Clara sat silent, watching her children play. The boy was pushing his little sister on the swing, both of them finding moments of joy despite the heat and their uncertain circumstances. Finally, Clara spoke, her voice barely audible. Brennan keeps his private business ledgers in his study, third shelf behind his desk, in a locked cabinet. The key is hidden in a tobacco tin on the mantel. He thinks no one knows about it, but I dust that room every week. She swallowed hard. He goes to the saloon every Tuesday and Thursday evening after supper. Stays until midnight at least. I'm usually the only servant in the house those nights. He gives the others time off because he doesn't want them seeing how drunk he gets. Elena's heart was pounding. This Tuesday, can you let us in? Not us, Grace said suddenly. Just Elena. One person is less likely to be noticed than several, and Elena can move quietly. I'll keep watch outside with Tom. Grace, Elena started to protest. It makes sense and you know it. You're smaller and quieter than Pa or Tom, and you know what to look for. Pa taught you to read contracts and legal documents when you were helping him after your mother died. You told me that yourself. Clara was shaking her head. This is madness. If you're caught, if we do nothing, we lose everything anyway, Elena said. At least this way we're fighting back. Please, Mrs. Reeves, help us. The woman's face crumpled, and for a moment Elena thought she'd refuse. Then Clara nodded, quick and sharp like ripping off a bandage. Tuesday, come to the back entrance at 9 o'clock. I'll let you in and show you where everything is, but after that you're on your own. If something goes wrong, I don't know you, and I didn't help you. I have to protect my children. Of course. Thank you. You're incredibly brave. I'm incredibly stupid, Clara corrected, but there was steel underneath the fear. But I'm also tired of watching Brennan destroy good people. Maybe it's time someone stood up to him. They parted ways carefully, making it look like a brief casual conversation between women at the park. Tom asked no questions when they returned to the wagon, but his eyes were knowing. The ride home was silent, each of them lost in thoughts of what Tuesday would bring. Silas listened to their report with a mixture of pride and terror. I should be the one going in, he said. Not Elena. Elena's the logical choice and you know it, Grace argued. She's smaller, quieter, and she knows what legal documents should look like. Plus, if something goes wrong, the children need you here. They need you alive and free, not arrested for breaking into Brennan's house. The stark truth of it silenced Silas's protests. He pulled Elena aside later when the children were occupied elsewhere. You don't have to do this, he said quietly. I know Grace was right about the logic, but you're not obligated to risk yourself for us. This is my fight. It stopped being just your fight the moment Brennan tried to claim me like property, Elena said, and it became something more the moment I decided to stay here, to be part of this family. So yes, I do have to do this, because this is my home now too, and I'll fight to protect it. Silas looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. When did you become so important to me? He asked, almost to himself. I brought you here to help with the children, to ease Grace's burden. I didn't expect... He stopped, seeming to struggle for words. I didn't expect you. I didn't expect any of this either, Elena admitted. But here we are. Here we are, Silas echoed. Then, slowly, giving her time to pull away, he lifted his hand and cupped her face gently. Come back safe on Tuesday. Whatever you find or don't find, just come back safe. The children need you. I need you. The confession hung between them, weighted with everything they hadn't said, everything the past 2 weeks had built between them. Elena leaned into his touch, just for a moment, letting herself feel the warmth and strength of him. I'll come back, she promised. I'm not going anywhere. Tuesday arrived with the same brutal heat that had characterized the entire summer. Elena dressed in dark, practical clothing and braided her hair tightly. Grace wanted to come along, but Silas put his foot down. One person was risky enough. Tom would drive Elena to town, position himself where he could watch for trouble, and be ready to extract her quickly if needed. The ride to town felt endless. Tom was silent beside her, his presence steady and reassuring. He parked the wagon in an alley 2 streets over from Brennan's house, a position that offered both concealment and quick escape routes. 15 minutes, Tom said quietly. If you're not back in 15 minutes, I'm coming in after you. Ooh, give me 20. Some of those ledgers might be complex. 15. After that, it doesn't matter what you found. The risk gets too high. Elena nodded and slipped out of the wagon, moving through the evening shadows toward Brennan's imposing house. It sat on the edge of town, a monument to wealth and power built on the backs of people he'd crushed. The lights were on in the main rooms, but the study Clara had described was dark. At exactly 9 o'clock, Elena knocked softly on the back entrance. Clara opened it immediately, her face pale but determined. "He left 10 minutes ago," she whispered. "Study's this way. Remember, 15 minutes maximum. After that, I can't help you anymore." Clara led her through dark hallways to the study. She produced a key from her pocket, the one from the tobacco tin, and unlocked the cabinet Brennan thought was secret. Inside were leather-bound ledgers, stacks of documents, and what looked like personal correspondence. "I'll keep watch," Claire said. "Hurry!" Elena pulled out ledgers and began scanning them by lamplight. The first contained normal business records, sales, purchases, expenses. But the second ledger was different. Coded entries, initials instead of names, references to acquisitions that had dates matching properties Elena knew Brennan had claimed. And there, in his own handwriting, evidence of payments to the magistrate, to witnesses who'd testified falsely, to men who'd committed arson and vandalism on his orders. It was all here. Everything they needed. Every crime meticulously documented by a man arrogant enough to believe he'd never be caught. Elena's hand shook as she copied the most damning entries onto paper she'd brought. Names, dates, amounts. The pattern was clear. Systematic corruption and intimidation stretching back 5 years. Brennan had built his empire on ashes and fear, and he'd written down every detail. She was finishing the last entry when Clara hissed from the doorway. "Someone's coming. Early. He's coming back early." Elena's heart lurched. She shoved the papers into her bodice, returned the ledgers exactly as she'd found them, and locked the cabinet. Clara was already moving, pulling her toward a different exit. "This way. There's a servant's passage. It'll take you to the side of the house." They ran silently through narrow hallways, Clara's knowledge of the house saving them precious seconds. Behind them, Elena heard Brennan's voice, loud and angry, demanding to know why lamps were lit in his study. "Go," Clara whispered, pushing her toward a door. "Go now." Elena squeezed her hand once. Gratitude, apology, solidarity, and then she was outside, running through the darkness toward where Tom waited. She heard shouting behind her, saw lights flaring in windows, but she didn't stop, didn't look back, just ran. Tom had the wagon moving before she'd fully climbed aboard. They raced through town, expecting pursuit at any moment, but none came. Either Brennan hadn't realized what had happened yet, or Clara had successfully deflected suspicion. They didn't slow until they were well outside town limits. Tom finally pulled the horses to a stop and looked at Elena. "Did you get it?" She pulled the papers from her bodice, still warm from her body heat. "Everything, every crime, every payment, every illegal acquisition. It's all here." Tom's weathered face split into a grin. "Then we've got him. We've actually got him." The ride back to the ranch felt different from the tense journey out. Elena's hands still shook with adrenaline, but underneath was a fierce satisfaction. They'd done it. They'd gathered the evidence needed to expose Brennan's corruption and protect their home. Silas met them in the yard, and the relief on his face when he saw Elena was almost painful in its intensity. He pulled her into a brief, tight embrace, then stepped back quickly, mindful of propriety but unable to hide his emotion. "You're safe. Thank everything. You're safe. And successful." Elena showed him the papers. "It's all here, Silas. Everything we need." They spent the rest of the night going through the documentation, Tom and Silas both contributing their knowledge of frontier law and legal procedures. By dawn, they had a comprehensive case, not just against Brennan's claim on the Rowe Ranch, but against his entire operation. "This goes to the territorial governor," Silas said finally. Bypass the local magistrate entirely. The governor's not in Brennan's pocket. At least, not yet. And with evidence this damning, he'll have to act. Brennan will know it came from us, Tom warned. He'll retaliate. Let him try. We've got proof now, and we're going public with it. The whole territory will know what he's done. That's protection better than any rifle. Silas looked at Elena. You did this. You risked everything, and you saved us. We saved ourselves, Elena corrected. All of us together. The next 2 weeks moved with agonizing slowness. Silas sent the evidence to the territorial capital with a trusted courier, along with a detailed letter outlining Brennan's crimes. They received confirmation it had arrived, that it was being reviewed, but no word on what action might be taken. Brennan, meanwhile, seemed to sense something had shifted. He made no more aggressive moves, filed no more legal claims. But his riders were seen watching the property, and the tension in town was palpable. Everyone knew something was coming, but no one knew what. The break came on a scorching afternoon in late August. A contingent of territorial marshals rode into the valley, official and imposing. They went first to Brennan's house, and Elena watched from the porch as they emerged hours later with Brennan himself in custody, along with several of his associates, including the corrupt magistrate. One of the marshals stopped at the Rowe Ranch to deliver the news personally. Brennan had been arrested on multiple charges. The evidence Elena had gathered was being used not just to void his claim on their property, but to review every land transaction he'd made in the past 5 years. Properties he'd acquired illegally would be returned to their rightful owners or their heirs. The governor wanted you to know, the marshal said, that your courage in coming forward may have saved a dozen families from Brennan's schemes. He's recommending you for territorial recognition. After the marshal left, the household erupted in relieved celebration. The children danced around the main room, Lily shrieking with joy despite not fully understanding why. Tom and the hands broke out whiskey and raised toasts, and Elena found herself pulled into Silas's arms, both of them holding on like survivors of a shipwreck finally reaching shore. It's over, Silas said into her hair. It's actually over. It's over, Elena agreed. That night, after the children were asleep and the hands had retired to the bunkhouse, Silas and Elena sat together on the porch. The summer heat was finally starting to break. Not much, but enough that the evening air felt almost comfortable. I've been thinking, Silas said carefully, about arrangements, about what happens now. Elena's stomach clenched. She'd been so focused on the immediate crisis that she hadn't considered what came after. With Brennan gone, with the threat removed, did Silas still need her? Had their arrangement run its course? You brought me here to help with the children, she said, trying to keep her voice steady, and to keep me out of Brennan's hands. Both those things are accomplished now, so if you think it's time for me to marry me. The words cut through her stumbling speech like a knife through silk. Elena stared at him, certain she'd misheard. What? Marry me, Silas repeated, turning to face her fully. I know this started as a transaction. I know I bought you from your father like you were property, and I'll carry that shame forever. But Elena, you've become so much more than I ever expected. You're not just help with the children. You're not just someone who kept us safe. He stopped, searching for words. You're the piece we were missing, the heart this family needed to heal. Grace adores you. Daniel trusts you. Lily loves you like a mother. And His voice broke, and Elena saw his careful composure cracking, revealing the depth of feeling beneath. I love you, he said simply. I didn't plan to, didn't expect to, but somewhere between watching you stand up to Brennan and seeing you comfort my children and risking your life to save our home, I fell completely in love with you. And I'm asking, if there's any chance you might feel the same, would you consider staying, not as hired help, but as my wife, as a true mother to these children who need you, as my partner in everything? Elena felt tears streaming down her face, hot and fast. I'm not what you think I am. I'm just a girl who got sold by her father and stumbled into your life by accident. I'm not refined or educated or... You're brave and kind and fierce when you need to be. You're exactly what I think you are, and what you are is everything I need. Silas took her hands. I'm not asking you to be something you're not. I'm asking you to be exactly who you are, here, with us, forever. The children? Already asked them. Grace nearly knocked me over hugging me when I told her I was going to propose. Daniel said it was about time, and Lily asked if this meant you'd tell her stories every night forever. And when I said yes, she declared it was the best thing that ever happened. Elena laughed through her tears. You asked the children before you asked me? Had to make sure they approved. They're part of this decision too. He squeezed her hands gently. So what do you say, Elena Hart? Will you take on a ready-made family and a stubborn rancher and a piece of frontier land that seems to attract trouble? Will you build this life with us? Will you marry me? She thought about everything that had brought her here. Her father's betrayal, the sale that had felt like the end of her world, the desperate situation that had seemed like only slightly better alternative to Brennan's clutches. She thought about Grace's exhausted face that first morning and how it had transformed over the weeks into something lighter, younger. She thought about Daniel's slow warming, Lily's absolute trust, the way this house had started to feel like home despite arriving here as property purchased with coin. She thought about Silas, this good man who'd paid a stranger's debt to save a girl he didn't know, who loved his children with fierce protectiveness, who'd stood against Brennan's power because it was right even when it was dangerous, who'd given her the choice to leave from the very beginning, but whose eyes had lit with hope when she'd chosen to stay. Yes, she said, and watched joy transform his face. Yes, I'll marry you. I'll be mother to your children and partner to you, and we'll build this life together. Silas pulled her into his arms then, holding her close, and Elena felt something settle deep in her chest, a sense of rightness, of belonging, of finding home in the last place she'd expected to look for it. I love you too, she whispered against his shoulder. I think I have for a while now. I was just too scared to admit it. Never be scared to tell me the truth. That's all I ask. Honesty, partnership, and fighting for each other the way we fought for this land. Always, Elena promised. They married a month later in town, after the first cool weather of autumn finally broke the summer's brutal hold. Grace stood beside Elena, holding her flowers and crying happy tears. Daniel and Lily served as attendants, both of them beaming. Tom gave Elena away, his weathered face proud, and the Hendricks brothers and Miller stood as witnesses. The ceremony was simple, held in the small church with most of the territory in attendance. News of Brennan's arrest and the Rowe family's courage had spread, and Elena found herself embraced by a community that had seemed hostile only weeks before. People thanked her for her bravery, congratulated Silas on finding such a strong partner, promised support for whatever the future might bring. Clara Reeves was there too, with her children, her face lighter than Elena had ever seen it. Brennan's arrest had freed her from service, and she'd found work with a kind family on the edge of town. She and Elena embraced like old friends, bound by shared risk and mutual courage. After the ceremony, the whole town turned out for a celebration in the park, where Elena and Grace had first approached Clara. There was food and music and dancing, and for one perfect evening, the frontier felt less harsh, less unforgiving. It felt like community. That night, Elena and Silas returned to the ranch as husband and wife. The children were staying with Tom and his wife in town for the night, giving the newlyweds privacy. But even alone, they moved slowly, savoring the transition from what had been to what would be. They stood on the porch together, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The same stars Elena had marveled at her first night here, when she'd been lost and frightened and uncertain of everything. "Do you ever think about how we got here?" Silas asked, his arm around her waist. "All the terrible circumstances that had to align to bring you to my door?" "Sometimes. My father's gambling, Brennan's schemes, your need for help with the children. It all seems so calculated by fate. Or just frontier luck, bad and good mixed together until you can't tell which is which." Silas pulled her closer. "I'm grateful for it, even the bad parts. They brought you here. They gave us this." Elena leaned into his strength, feeling the solid reality of him, of this life they'd built from transaction and crisis and unexpected love. "What do you think happens now, after everything we've been through?" "Now? We do the boring work of building a life, raising children, running the ranch, surviving winters and summers and everything in between. It won't be dramatic. It probably won't be easy, but it'll be ours." "That sounds perfect." They stood together as darkness fell completely and the summer finally, truly, broke. The next day would bring cooler temperatures, the promise of autumn, the changing of seasons. But tonight, Elena Hart, now Elena Rowe, stood in the home she'd earned through courage and love, surrounded by the family she'd chosen and who had chosen her in return. The girl who'd been sold beneath the burning summer sun had found something money couldn't buy and violence couldn't take away. She'd found worth, purpose, belonging. She'd found herself. And as the stars wheeled overhead in their eternal patterns, Elena smiled and let herself believe in the future. In springs that would bring new growth, in summers that would test their strength, in autumns of harvest and winters of endurance. In a life built from the ashes of what might have been, transformed into something beautiful by will alone. She'd come to this ranch in chains she couldn't see, bought like property, desperate and afraid. But she'd leave the summer behind as a woman who'd claimed her own power, who'd fought for her family, who'd stood against corruption and won. The frontier had tried to break her. Instead, she'd bent it to her will. And in the cooling night air, with her husband's arms around her and her future stretching bright and certain ahead, Elena finally, completely, came home.